with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, April 8th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Dr. Annelle Sheline, Quincy Institute Middle East Research Fellow, on Biden's Yemen policy. Then we'll be talking to Jonathan Geyer, managing editor at the American Prospect, on big tech's relationship with our national security state and the preponderance of consultants that seem to be filling out our national security positions. Meanwhile, 1/4 of all U.S. adults now fully vaccinated. However, it's coming at a time when the more virulent and deadly B.1.1.7 variant now dominant in the U.S. Joe Manchin reverses. Now says he won't vote to weaken the filibuster at all. Meanwhile, Biden to announce administrative actions to restrict some guns and gun accoutrement, I guess. State Department says the U.S. is now prepared to lift the sanctions in line with the Iran nuclear deal. Joe Biden releases this corporate tax plan, includes restrictions on offshoring. New Mexico is now the second state to ban qualified immunity. The undocumented win some relief in New York State in the wake of a hunger strike. And a Texas state court opens the eviction floodgates down there. Meanwhile, Joe Biden is being pushed to cancel existing border wall contracts. The Trump Organization hires a criminal defense attorney. That's interesting. And there's a Supreme Court case which could, at the very least, lessen the burden of private student loan debt. And lastly, North Dakota, their Senate passes a ban on mask mandates. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Glad you could make it. Joining me, as always, Emma Vigeland. Emma, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How about you, Sam?
I am doing well as well. You, 1/4 of Americans now fully vaccinated, or American adults. You are one of those, but
I am as of yesterday. So I
got the arm soreness going.
I got the arm soreness, but I have Pfizer, and I'll be honest, I was anticipating worse symptoms, and I said to Sam, I may not be able to come in today. I feel pretty much fine, so that's encouraging.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some people have been wiped out on that second shot for a day or so, but it's...
And they said particularly women, which is why I was paying attention to it, but no. So I think it's just very person to person.
There you go. Meanwhile, I mentioned earlier that Joe Manchin had penned an op-ed, I guess it was in the Washington Post, saying that he would not vote to get rid of the filibuster and would not vote to weaken the filibuster. Now, if that feels a little bit like whiplash to you, it's because 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was the one who introduced the idea of the talking filibuster and saying that it should be painful in some ways to exercise the filibuster. And that was, I think most people interpret that as a weakening of the filibuster. So it's unclear exactly what's going on here. This is also coming in the wake of the ruling by the parliamentarian the other day that there's more opportunity for more things to be passed through the reconciliation process, but that apparently is also causing some confusion. So it is unclear exactly where the very slim majority in the Senate for the Democrats stands in terms of passing some of these bills. Joe Manchin seems to think that there's 10 Republican votes for measures to protect voting rights in this country or to diminish the power of corporations on their influence on our elections and our elected leaders. I mean, it seems like it's clear that we don't have 50 Democrats, never mind 10 Republicans for that. But here is Joe Biden yesterday having introduced the infrastructure bill, or at least one tranche of the infrastructure bill last week. Yesterday, they introduced sort of the corporate tax element of this, which purports to raise $2.5 trillion over the course of 10 years. In raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, still, that would put it 7 percentage points less than it was at the beginning of the Trump administration. And also closing the loopholes that allow major corporations to offshore their profits and escape U.S. taxes by basically saying, we're going to levy a 15% tax on what you tell your investors your profit was, not what you tell the IRS what your profits were.
Right. That's probably the more reliable metric.
Indeed. And so here is Joe Biden yesterday being asked or discussing the infrastructure bill. We should say that just before this, a reporter asked him, will you have failed on your promise of bipartisanship if you don't get Republicans on board? The infrastructure bill has 57% support by Republican voters, has 73% support by Americans generally. The reporters are trying to define bipartisanship here in getting 10 Republican senators on board. And that is a framing, I think, that Joe Biden's going to push back against. But here is his response. This is number 2 on him speaking about the urgency of the infrastructure bill.
So here we are. Democrats and Republicans will have ideas about what they like and what they don't like about our plan. That's a good thing. That's the American way. That's the way democracy works. Debate is welcome. Compromise is inevitable. Changes are certain. In the next few weeks, the Vice President and I will be meeting with Republicans and Democrats to hear from everyone. And we'll be listening. We'll be open to good ideas and good faith negotiations. But here's what we won't be open to. We will not be open to doing nothing. Inaction simply is not an option. Now, since I announced this plan, I've heard from my Republican friends say that many of them say it's too big. They say, why not focus on traditional infrastructure? Fix what we've already got, the roads and the highways that exist and the bridges. I'm happy to have that debate. But I want to tell you my view. We are America. We don't just fix for today. We build for tomorrow. 200 years ago, trains weren't traditional infrastructure either, until America made a choice to lay down tracks across the country. Highways weren't traditional infrastructure until we allowed ourselves to imagine that roads could connect our nation across state lines. The idea of infrastructure has always evolved to meet the aspirations of the American people and their needs. And it's evolving again today. We need to start seeing infrastructure through its effect on the lives of working people in America. What is the foundation today that they need to carve out their place in the middle class, to make it, to live, to go to work, to raise their families with dignity, to ensure that good jobs will be there for their kids, no matter who they are or what zip code they live in?
I'm torn here by the just sheer lunacy of that. That anybody in Washington D.C. thinks that the American public cares about what the definition of infrastructure means.
Apparently Republicans think infrastructure is doing nothing, and Biden thinks infrastructure is something different. I mean, this is what they've been quibbling about for weeks, is what falls under the umbrella of infrastructure as the country collectively falls asleep.
I think it was a tweet by Natalie Scherz. She's a writer who said that the Republicans define infrastructure as exclusively what exists for commercial purposes, and Democrats seem to be attempting to define infrastructure in terms of like what helps people generally.
Right.
And I think Biden did a good job of at least addressing that and taking it at face value. I happen to be of the mind that the American public doesn't really feel terribly concerned about what the definition of infrastructure is. But I guess if they've got to do this little dance here and say, well, infrastructure means actually what helps people live their daily lives, as opposed to stuff that is like made out of cement, then great. There's going to be this kabuki theater. Chris Coons, I think, mentioned yesterday that the deadline, and he, of course, was a key Biden surrogate, and just coincidentally also happens to be one of my least favorite senators. He said May was the deadline. Or mid-May. So
because COVID had that the COVID relief package had that self-imposed deadline of March 14th, I believe, before the benefits from the last relief package expired. This is going to be a lot more of an arduous process just based on the fact that it's open-ended.
Right. And so I think the idea is that we're in the period now where there's going to be 10 Republican senators are going to go to the White House, and they're going to have coffee and cookies. And then they're going to say, oh, we're close, maybe. And then there's going to be this theater. And then around May, we'll see a reconciliation bill, would be my guess. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be talking to Anal Shaleen on Joe Biden's, or I should say the Biden administration's Yemen policy. We'll be right back in just a moment. Folks, it's spring. People are getting vaccinated. Maybe you're leaving your house a bit more, going out to eat even. Cautiously, of course. I took Saul out to get a bagel this weekend. We actually sat outside.
Very fun.
At a table. First time in a year that we have actually done that.
That's really nice.
A little nervous. Of course, we have our masks on when we're ordering. Everything, but when it's time to eat, you got to put your mask someplace clean, correct?
Yes.
Where do? You shove it in your pocket? Well, let me tell you what I do. I mean, I've had these for a long time. But you don't want to put it on the table. You don't want to shove it in your pocket and get it all nasty. You don't want to let whatever is in the air absorbed. Well, that's why I have one of these mask bags. See this?
Bag?
It's got a little hook on it. It also comes with a lanyard if you want to put around your neck.
That's perfect for your Carhartts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I am a very big, if I can hook something onto my belt thing, then I like to do that. But you keep this mask keep your bag in your mask, clip it to your keychain or your belt loop or whatever, your backpack if you want. You always have your mask with you. You keep it clean and protected. And I'm also told this is actually stylish. by people.
It is sleek looking.
It is. And this is actually one of the masks I got from Comes in Colors as well. They have a bunch of really, this is a high quality mask.
Time,
I
yeah.
do wear this all the time. It's got gauze on the inside.
Oh,
so
wow.
it's a protective mask, and it's comfortable, and you can check them out, comesincolors.com. They have all sorts of, like I say, lanyards. They have it different colors, obviously. Comesincolors.com. Check it out for your masks and your very stylish mask bags.
Both stylish.
Mm-hmm. Also, today's show is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Counseling. They're giving our audience 10% off their first month when you go to betterhelp.com/Majority Report. BetterHelp gives you access to your own fully licensed and accredited therapist via phone, chat, or video. Look, stressful time. I've been having acid reflux, and my ear, nose, and throat doctor said it's stress. She said everybody's
so you don't need
stressed.
to cut down the coffee anymore?
Well, I got to do that first. I got to cut down on all that stuff.
Dang
But
it.
she said it's stress. It's stress. Everybody's feeling it. Well, that is why having someone to talk to, a therapist, so important. And a lot of therapists elsewhere have long wait lists. Particularly now, it can take weeks or months before they can see you. When you sign up with BetterHelp, they match you with a therapist based on your specific needs. You'll be communicating with them in less than 24 hours. Once BetterHelp connects you with a therapist, if you don't think it's a good fit, you can switch to a new one at any time. You can do it for any reason. There is no additional charge to do so. They have thousands of licensed therapists from all over the country. So they have therapists with specialties that may not be available in your area. Of course, everybody's doing remote therapy these days. Sometimes, we were saying earlier, I do it from this set. It's a little bit awkward.
I asked if I could do it from this set or later today.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's just what's happening. And the other thing that's good about BetterHelp is that their therapists tend to be more affordable than therapists you find through traditional means. So you don't have to have insurance to use BetterHelp, and they have financial aid options for those who qualify. BetterHelp is giving everyone in our audience 10% off your first month when you go to betterhelp.com/Majority Report. That's better, HELP.com/Majority Report. You can find the URL in the video description if you're watching this on YouTube. You can find it in our podcast description. If you're listening as a podcast, we'll have that URL there, as well as the one from Comes in Colors, so you can get your stylish masks and mask bags. Okay, want to welcome to the program Dr. Annelle Sheline. She is a Quincy Institute Middle East Research Fellow. Dr. Sheline, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So for the sake of folks who may not remember and be aware, tell us first about just the civil war that's been ongoing in Yemen, why Saudi Arabia got involved, and then what was ostensibly the U.S. foreign policy at that time as to why we as a country sort of, I guess, constructive engagement would be the sort of the most charitable way of referring to it.
Yeah, so the situation in Yemen goes all the way back to the Arab Spring protests in 2011. Unlike Egypt and Tunisia, where the governments fell relatively quickly, in Yemen, it dragged out for years. The President Saleh, who had been in charge for decades, really clung to power, and he only stepped down much later. And what we've seen subsequently is kind of the ongoing power struggle that has resulted. So at the time, sort of the regional involvement and US involvement was such that Saudi Arabia was involved in trying to negotiate Saleh stepping down through what was known as the GCC initiative, so involving all the members of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And that it was through that process that the current president, Hadi, who's in exile in Saudi Arabia, ruling over essentially his hotel room, is the level of control, that he is backed up by Saudi Arabia. And so he himself was not elected, but he was the legitimate government put in place as part of this drawn out transition process. And Yemen then had a national dialogue conference, which at the time was seen as a model of an inclusive process to talk about what the future of Yemen would look like, involving women and young people. But it didn't involve everyone. And the Houthis, the Houthi rebel group, also known as Ansar Allah, they in particular were somewhat dissatisfied by the outcomes, which then is part of why they eventually invaded the capital of Sana'a and have subsequently continued to make military advancements. Again, it's been a bit of a back and forth in terms of the territory they control. So on the one hand, you do have a lot of people in Yemen who continue to see the Hadi government as kind of the last point before everything fell apart. And they would like to sort of return to that as a starting place moving forward, whereas others see the Hadi government as fundamentally illegitimate or just as primarily an obstacle to their own objectives. And so that would be, for example, the Houthis, as well as the Southern Transitional Council, which is supported by the UAE, which controls part of the South, although not all of the former South Yemen. So it gets very complicated, and these aren't even all of the main actors involved, but that's some background for sort of why we see such heavy Saudi involvement and support for the government of President Hadi, as well as UAE involvement, although their goals have increasingly sort of diverged from those of Saudi Arabia. The UAE is interested in establishing a presence in the south, because that would then give them, not necessarily that they would invade and take over this territory as their own, but that this government that was very indebted to them for its very existence would then give them this footprint outside of the Persian Gulf that then reflects sort of the territorial ambitions of Mohammed bin Zayed, the ruler of Abu Dhabi.
Well, what motivates those territorial ambitions? I mean, both from the Saudi perspective. I mean, the Saudis really concerned about their territorial integrity. Is the UAE? I mean, what are these territorial ambitions? What motivates them?
So Saudi Arabia initially was involved because they feared that Iran was helping the Houthis. And what's ironic is at the time that Saudi Arabia invaded or launched military intervention almost exactly 6 years ago in March of 2015, the Iranians were not all that involved. The Houthis had been rebelling against the central government of Yemen. There's a long history there of violence and repression. I mean, the Houthis were targeted with a lot of violence, which they then responded to with violence of their own, as often happens. And so the Saudis worried that the Iranians were helping them, when in fact the result of Saudi intervention has been that the Iranians have seen this as a great opportunity to get the Saudis more and more bogged down in Yemen. And it's not costly for the Iranians to sort of send a few cheap they can smuggle them in relatively easily. And then the Houthis themselves have demonstrated a capacity to build upon what the Iranians send them, to kind of develop things themselves. So it's not just that the Iranians are supporting them, but that the Iranians can do so very cheaply, and the Houthis kind of do all the rest.
And the U.S. At one point, as opposed, I guess, my understanding is that during the Obama administration, the Obama administration perspective was, well, let's engage in this, and that way we can maybe I don't know, hold some reins over Saudi Arabia.
Well, at the time, it was very motivated by the Obama administration trying to negotiate the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal. And they knew the Saudis were not going to be happy with that, in part because the Saudis wanted a deal that addressed other aspects of what Iran was doing around the region. And at the time, it was decided that the agreement was just going to focus on the nuclear question, and the hope was they could build on it subsequently. And, obviously instead we saw Trump throwing it out, and, the Biden administration now just trying to get back to sort of square one on that. And so there was a piece from Rob Malley, who's now the special envoy to Iran in foreign affairs, where he expresses a lot of regret about that decision from the Obama administration to not immediately condemn the Saudis and to try to force them to rein in their military action at the time. Because I think just in general, there are a lot of narratives about Yemen right now. There's been a lot of public pressure. We're seeing members of Congress signing onto this letter saying Biden needs to lift the blockade, or pressure Saudi Arabia to lift the blockade. which is accurate. The blockade is directly causing the hundreds of thousands of deaths that we're seeing in Yemen. Many of these are not deaths from kinetic violence, but deaths from the violence of starvation and lack of access to medicine, to fuel, etc. But at the same time that we're seeing that narrative pushing against Saudi Arabia, which also plays into certain US political considerations, it's important to keep in mind the Houthis are also very much to blame here, that they're also preventing aid from reaching this population, that they control the territory where the majority of Yemenis live. So when you see these photos of starving Yemenis, that's not just the Saudi blockade, that's also the Houthis not doing more to try to facilitate aid getting to these individuals. And this was initially part of what led to pressure against the Houthis. We saw that, the Trump administration in the final days designated the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization, which the Biden administration then lifted. But then that was criticized as kind of losing any sort of leverage that we had against the Houthis. So in general, there are no good actors here. The people, warlords and powerful individuals on the ground are benefiting from the lack of resources and sort of using that to continue to enrich themselves. And almost no one is really looking out for the average Yemeni who is suffering, and many hundreds of thousands of people are dying or at risk of death.
Well, one of those bad actors, though, or one side is being financially supported by the United States. So we cover the United States more frequently than we do international politics, and so I think that's a lot of where our discussion lies. Just turning to how the Biden administration approached this in his first few weeks in office. They said very interestingly, or they parsed their language very carefully, saying that they were going to stop offensive funds to Saudi Arabia. But the reason that this conversation is still being brought about today is that the blockade is technically not a part of offensive operations, right? So the United States is still funding that. Can you expand on why that language was so particular and how that's caused what we're seeing today?
Yes, so the language was very careful, as you noted, because from the Saudis' perspective, everything they're doing is defensive because they see Houthi actions against them as acts of war. The Houthis have fired over 500 sort of missiles and drones, and thus far that has resulted in, I believe, only a single death in Saudi Arabia. So again, it's the proportionality is really not the same at all when you think about the massive devastation of Saudi airstrikes to the civilian population, to infrastructure, exacerbating all of these problems that we're observing on the ground in Yemen. And you're absolutely right that the US here only has leverage over Saudi Arabia, which is why humanitarian groups and activists really applauded Biden's initial statements. But subsequently, this letter, Congress has asked for more clarification on that, what exactly is meant by offensive operations, what is included in the ban on weapons, or sort of the pause on weapons that are being sold to Saudi Arabia, and what are expectations around that. Could that potentially, many activists would argue the US shouldn't sell any weapons to Saudi Arabia, which I would agree with. But again, the Biden administration has not been particularly forthcoming on that. And my hunch is partly because there was a lot of momentum in Congress around this. I mean, Trump had to exert his veto multiple times against efforts by Congress to either end US support for the war on Yemen, or to try to provide some kind of accountability for Saudi Arabia, specifically for the murder of Khashoggi, but also for Yemen. And so Biden knew going in that there was a broad coalition in Congress that was ready to act to perhaps reimpose the War Powers Resolution, to say that the US does not have congressional authority to be engaging militarily at all here. And so it's possible that Biden wanted to move to sort of preempt that. And we have subsequently seen efforts by Congress, this recent letter demanding the US pressure Saudi Arabia to lift the blockade, but not yet moving forward on that War Powers Resolution, which would have much broader implications. And I do think it is very important that Congress reimpose that congressionally mandated authority.
So this is, so to the extent that the United States has any ability to impact this at this point, we're also looking at, I mean, obviously it's a failure by the Biden administration to exercise any leverage over Saudi Arabia, but it's also a failure of Congress to exercise leverage over the Biden administration here.
Yes, and in general, the Biden administration, I think, feels that they have tried to exert some pressure on Saudi Arabia by pausing these specific weapon sales, by saying they've ended support for offensive military action. And I do think a large part of this also is unfortunately tied up with negotiations with Iran. That from the Iranian perspective, they see the Yemen card as something they know that Biden is interested in resolving or doing something to ameliorate this situation in Yemen. And so the Iranians are hanging on to that for now and not yet doing anything to tell the Houthis, for example, to pause the assault on Ma'arib, which is a key strategic city that thus far remains relatively stable, has actually somewhat prospered under the current context of a lack of centralized government in Yemen, which I think is another important thing to keep in mind here in terms of thinking about the future in Yemen. It is not likely to successfully go back to a centralized system, which historically it never really had. You know, it had been, we can get into more of kind of the Yemeni history, but that under the Saleh government that ruled for several decades, large parts of the country were completely neglected, corruption was rife. Yemen was already categorized as a fragile or failing state before all of this happened, before 2011. And so I think moving forward, it is going to be very important to keep in mind that putting Yemen back together again is unlikely to happen. And we probably will either see an outcome of going back to a North and South Yemen or possibly the emergence of several sort of federated regions.
Which just really benefits, you know, Iran and Saudi Arabia, right? If there was to be that sort of factioning, because this essentially is a ground war in terms of both of them gaining influence. I mean, where do the Yemeni people fall in terms of consequences if that were to be the case?
I think what I hear, and some of this I'm basing on a really excellent article, if viewers are interested, written by Nadwa al-Dawsari for the Arab Center DC, where she talks about the fact that moving forward, it's not probably going to work for Yemen to have this sort of centralized government again, and that it hadn't been working very well for Yemen otherwise. I mean, Yemenis want the conflict to end. They want food and fuel to come back in. But many are very concerned about, you know, Biden potentially just trying to wash his hands of this and leaving the former North Yemen to the Houthis and the former South Yemen to the STC. And, you know, that the Houthis, although they lack the air capacity or the military capacity to exert the same level of devastation that the Saudis do, it's not for want of trying. The Houthis really, you know, are lots of allegations of abuse and torture. Evidence, in fact, of abuse and torture that documented by Human Rights Watch, et cetera. So although the level of devastation coming from Saudi Arabia is much higher, I do think it is important to keep in mind that Yemen won't be resolved if Biden sort of gives the north to the Houthis, that there are many people within Yemen who would reject that and who would continue to fight against them.
So if I understand what you're saying in terms of the relationship with the Iran nuclear deal and what's going on there, that the Biden administration, if I understand what you're saying, then interpreting what has been happening with the nuclear deal is that then the Biden administration was trying to keep Iran's support for the Houthis on the table. And the Iranians were basically saying, like, look, you broke the nuke deal. That was not on the table during that deal. Yesterday, the State Department said, we're going to get rid of the sanctions that are associated with the nuclear deal. We still have other sanctions, but that has to do with other activities that the Iranians are doing. And the Biden administration was hoping to still maintain some leverage in returning to the table. But of course, that was absurd because we need to get back to sort of like baseline, essentially, to start that. And so it's ultimately that the Biden administration does not want, this really comes down to us, the Biden administration, the national security state, not wanting to endanger our relationship with Saudi Arabia. And it really, I mean, ultimately, we need to have a fundamental decision as to what that relationship is going to be, isn't it?
Yes, and we saw this, for example, with the release of the Khashoggi report, that Biden declined to sanction Mohammed bin Salman, despite that report indicating very clearly that he was, in fact, as was suspected, responsible for the gruesome murder of Khashoggi. I do think it is important. The future of the Middle East is going to be tied to Saudi Arabia, and I do think that, unfortunately, Mohammed bin Salman is not going anywhere. So as awful as we know he is, I think it may be prudent on Biden's part to try to maintain something of a working relationship with him. But I think what he should do is to just give him what he wants. Mohammed bin Salman says he wants more independence. He says he wants Saudi Arabia to be a leader. I think Biden should say, yeah, sure, go for it. We have sold you, hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons. And at this point, we are not going to continue to be your security guarantor. And what we observe in the region is Saudi Arabia behaves less aggressively towards adversaries when it doesn't think it has the US to back it up. We saw this after the attacks on the Abqaiq oil facility in September of 2019. The muted response from the Trump administration led to these quiet back channel negotiations where the Saudis said, hey, Iran, we don't actually want to fight this war, right? Yeah. And so as long as the Saudis think that the US is going to back them up, then they're happy to behave aggressively or make aggressive statements towards Iran. So I think in general, in the future, the United States needs to have a much smaller military footprint in the region. And these countries need to make decisions about their behavior towards each other based on their own appetite to absorb the costs of these conflicts, when they don't think it's going to be the US absorbing it, that it is really going to be themselves. So that's why I think Biden needs to be very clear with Mohammed bin Salman that that the blockade must lift. This is unacceptable to sort of bargain with the lives of millions of Yemeni people. And that moving forward, the US is, this is a whole other issue, but the US is transitioning towards China, which I think is problematic in and of itself, and we shouldn't be setting up for a Cold War with China. But the rulers in the region should anticipate that they're going to need to make their decisions about their security based on their own capacity and not this huge military footprint in the region. So while this large footprint remains, Biden should use the pressure that he has, but should also make very clear that over time, the US military footprint is going to go down in the region. We don't need it to be there anymore. We're no longer dependent on oil from the Middle East. And at this point, the US military presence, in my view, is the result of inertia.
Well, a lot of what you said mirrors so much of how the United States relates to Israel as well. I mean, just in terms of emboldening them to take bolder actions via our funds. How does Israel's presence factor into this conflict, specifically related to the Iran deal, which is so central to what we're talking about right now?
Yes, so it's been interesting, obviously, since the Abraham Accords to see this rising anti-Iran coalition of Israel, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Bahrain, et cetera, sort of, and perhaps because there is this anticipated reduction of US force presence in the region, that Israel is building up its strength vis-a-vis Iran. But again, I do think that the US doesn't need to worry about Israel the way it once did. Israel has nukes, Israel has normalized relations with many of its neighbors, and even if they aren't publicly normalized, Israel has a working relationship with many of these countries, including Saudi Arabia. So Israel no longer needs the United States to back it up in the way it once did. And as you said, this perception of the US being kind of the big bully standing behind it, ready to defend it, is part of why we then see Israel taking these more aggressive actions. For example, threatening to annex the West Bank. And so moving forward, the US needs to make sure that our policy towards the region is based on US interests and not on what Israel wants and not on what Saudi Arabia wants, but what actually benefits the United States. And our current the expenditure and military presence at the moment does not reflect US interests. It reflects an outdated mode of thinking, and it also reflects the interests of the Department of Defense, which wants to maintain a lot, and specifically the Army, that wants to continue to have huge amounts of resources that it has enjoyed for the past several decades, in part because the Navy is going to increasingly get resources as the US finally engages in this so-called pivot to Asia, that's going to involve bolstering the Navy forces, unfortunately. I also think that's problematic, and the US should really be focusing these resources here at home where they're desperately needed. But again, the Army anticipates that it's going to lose out in future defense budgets. And so it's trying to argue that, no, we have to maintain now this huge military presence in the Middle East. And also we need to prepare for this so-called Cold War with China. All of it is just about access to resources.
Okay. And so lastly, basically, I hate to use this metaphor, but we as a nation, and we have these internal dynamics that are, sort of incentivizing and pushing this. You say it's inertia, and part of it is like just, some departments want to increase their budgets year over year type of situation. But we're distorting essentially the market, if you will, in that region in terms of like what people think that they can afford to do and not do in certain. All right. Well, so lastly, the other thing that you wrote a piece recently about, it seems like we also have a misinterpretation or misunderstanding of how we are perceived by the Yemenis. That and just outline that briefly, and also tell me if you think that's actually like a sincere misinterpretation or if it's just a convenient one because we're not willing to make the actual real hard choices regarding Saudi Arabia. And this is an easier thing to sort of just say, like, we don't understand what's going on.
Yeah, so this specifically gets to when Tim Lenderking he's gone on 3 trips to the region since he was appointed in early February. He's trying ostensibly, but then he expressed confusion when the Houthis rejected his proposal for a ceasefire. And I responded to that with some frustration because the Houthis see Lenderking and the US as fully on the Saudi side. And so, this American perception that we're coming in as a neutral arbiter, that we can somehow negotiate a ceasefire between these two opposing sides, we're seen as a belligerent. And so we lack credibility coming in from the Houthis' perspective. And this is tying back into this notion of the importance of Iran to all this. But I do think it's important to keep in mind the Houthis are not Iranian puppets. I mean, the Houthis have their own agenda. And even if the US got to a place where we had a functioning relationship with Iran to the extent that we could say, hey, Iran, could you please stop sending so much support to the Houthis? They could do so, and the Houthis might not change their behavior at all because the Houthis are largely self-sufficient. They were operating and holding territory long before Iran sort of bolstered the support it was sending them. And they have their own agenda. I mean, they have accomplished all of their gains through war. They have seen no reason to negotiate and no benefits from negotiation. So from their perspective, why would they stop now? They're determined to take the strategic city of Madib, which would give them access to oil resources that they otherwise lack, and would essentially completely obliterate the Hadi government, and it would consolidate their control of the former North Yemen. So again, this just gets to why it is so complicated, because on the one hand, the US is supporting Saudi Arabia's blockade, which is starving Yemenis. But on the other hand, the outcome of the Houthis simply taking over and imposing control is not likely to lead to a peaceful outcome either.
Well, it's I guess it's not a huge surprise to me, but it is pretty explicitly the same question that we've been basically asking for 20 years. It's like, what is the purpose that we have in being in that region? And the answer ends up being none. And we could...
Worse than none, that we contribute to instability, we contribute to these incentives where countries act more violently. I mean, if we could all just rewind to 2015 and if the Obama administration had convinced Saudi Arabia not to intervene at the time, and if Yemen had sort of been kept as a civil war, which it already was, again, not that this would bring peace, but if it could, from my perspective, it's important to get Yemen back to a position where it's not subject to all this foreign intervention, that Yemenis on the ground need to make their decisions based on their own access to resources and their own capacity, as opposed to civil wars that drag on for decades because of the influx of foreign resources. This is why civil wars tend to last so long, is because there's no reason anyone would stop fighting because the money and the guns just keep flowing in.
Dr. Annelle Sheline, Quincy Institute Middle East Research Fellow, thank you so much for your time today. We'll link to your pieces, really interesting stuff. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking to Jonathan Geyer about those domestic incentives that drive our involvement in places like this. We'll be right back after this. We're back. Joining us now, Jonathan Geyer. He's the managing editor at the American Prospect. Jonathan, welcome. I'm here with Emma Vigeland. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So we were just talking to Annelle Sheline about our involvement in the Middle East, and one of the things that came up was the sort of the incentive structure for like the army to stay there, so that they can continue to get to build their budget year over year, I guess. And you've written a couple of pieces over the past couple of months about sort of some of the infrastructure that drives, our expansion, I guess. I mean, you could call it our imperial expansion, and certainly our national security state. And it comes down to money. I mean, basically, it all comes down to money. But let's just I want to talk about Jake Sullivan. I also want to talk about Eric Schmidt, though, because I think both of those are at play here. You did an expansive piece on Eric Schmidt and his involvement in the adoption of artificial intelligence for a national security state. And he was sort of working both sides of it. Will you just explain that?
Yeah, it's sort of complex, but let me break it down. So the Google billionaire, Eric Schmidt, is on this government advisory board. It advises Congress and the Pentagon, saying, we need to invest in AI for war. We need machine learning, artificial intelligence, every aspect of defense and intelligence. But he's also investing as part of his venture capital work in the very companies that do this type of work. So it seems like a very obvious conflict of interest to have the chair of the National Artificial Intelligence Board also investing and making money off of these very technologies and making technologies tailor-made for war. So one of these companies I focused on, Rebellion Defense, it seems really cuddly and it's a kind of Star Wars joke, but really this is a revolving door issue. These are all former Pentagon officials who went into the private sector and are just making bank using all their connections. They know how grants and various awards work. These are million or billion-dollar projects. And you have this kind of revolving door factor of people making money off the previous government experience, chief among them, Eric Schmidt, a Google billionaire.
And I mean, this dynamic, this is why, we wanted to sort of pair the two of you here today, because this dynamic, when they're telling the army they got to buy this stuff, the army is buying this stuff, and this is basically, it is a self-licking ice cream cone type of situation. And it just is driving these policies that end up leading to the deaths of tens of thousands, hundred thousands of people. And because, and the answer, I mean, this is the thing, and this comes in, this is where, sort of like Jake Sullivan comes in, and you're writing about this notion of like this conflict and this confluence of consultants and academics, and they're wearing all these multiple hats. And there's this sort of, the response to the Eric Schmidt thing would be like, well, of course, he's the expert at AI. He's recommending they do it. Why wouldn't he go out and invest in these companies? Because he believes he's showing some integrity in his belief that he's actually willing to put his money where his mouth is on some level. But that's highly problematic.
Well, what I would say is, the kind of corruption, legalized corruption in Washington has got a lot of attention when it comes to the financial sector and not a lot when it comes to national security or foreign policy. So if you're Jake Sullivan, Biden's national security advisor, and you were advising Uber, you're advising big banks, you're advising even something funny like the toy company Lego, over the past 2 years, it's not immediately clear how it's a conflict of interest, but you know that corporate influence has a huge role in how Biden is staffing this administration. And the place I'm really interested in is the consultancy world, because they're not quite lobbyists. We don't know who they're consulting for. The companies won't talk about it. The consultants won't talk about it. And yet they're cashing in on their recent government experience. And worst of all, from my perspective, advising companies over the last 2 years what a Biden administration or a Democratic administration might do when they're in power. So these represent real conflicts, and they're not exactly borne out. We don't know in the Situation Room how they're borne out, but we know that, you know, many high-level Biden officials were working for corporate interests over the past 2 years. That has to affect the way policies are made in Yemen and Saudi Arabia, wherever people have corporate or business interests.
Do you have a sense of what could break this cycle? I mean, short of, you know, that this is endemic to capitalism, that there are there ways in which to sort of like pull this apart in some way, so that those people who are influencing the policy of the United States, whether it's foreign policy or domestic policy for that matter, are not doing so because they have a vested interest, or that those interests are even aligned, right? I mean, even if you want to take the most charitable perspective, like, well, I just happen to believe in AI, and so of course I would tell the government to adopt it, and of course, if I have billions of dollars, I'm going to invest in it. But how do you like, what is it? Just simply making ethics rules, or what?
So, I mean, Biden does have the most robust ethics rules to date, but we need radical transparency. We need to go even further. I mean, I got my hands on some documents that showed, you know, an average ethics form for this National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence is maybe 5 to 10 pages. Eric Schmidt's was 37 pages long. That has to be financial entanglements. When someone like a Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, Tony Blinken, Secretary of State, when they make ethical disclosures, they disclose as little as possible. And we could really reform the rules to make sure that there's a wide amount of information about who these people's clients were. And by the way, what were they doing? I reached out to Microsoft, for example, which Jake Sullivan worked for. They didn't want to comment in detail, but it seems to me if you have a Microsoft breach about a month ago, and Jake Sullivan is tweeting about it and saying we need to download this Microsoft patch, you have to wonder, is he tweeting as the former advisor to the president of Microsoft or the current advisor to President Biden?
Is the consultant corruption, this new iteration of it, sort of a response to or a rebranding of what we saw get a lot of attention in the Bush administration as the Iraq and Afghanistan wars waged, where it was a lot clearer that these were defense contractors? Now we just have a smarter upgrade to the software, not to use an analogy that's especially relevant to what you're discussing.
Well, there's two crucial points. One is, it's not that the defense industry doesn't need a huge software update. They are behind, and that's true. It just doesn't need to be commercialized, let's say. And second, the corruption I'm talking about, you know, it doesn't compare to the Trump level swamp where, you know, there are really nasty entanglements. But even so, we ought to hold the Biden administration to a really high standard. And it's not good enough to say you were a consultant, but you're not going to extensively share your clients or exactly what you were doing for them. And there's this whole kind of soft space where, oh, these are AI companies, so that's different than defense. But in fact, they're all working on similar issues, and really radical disclosure and getting a really deep sense of what Biden officials were working on. 20 Biden officials in his top national security inner circle were working as consultants in the last couple of years. And that has to be very defining of how they see the world.
How many, I mean, so if 20 of them were working as consultants, how many exist? Like, what percentage is that?
I couldn't give you the percentage, Sam, but we're talking about, you know, top people in the National Security Council and the State Department. I'm getting financial disclosures every day from the White House, and I'll say, oh my God, there's another person who was at Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State's firm. It just runs deep. And one of my concerns is people haven't been giving the kind of attention to consulting because it's not lobbying, but we might call it shadow lobbying. They are working for corporations. They're not directly asking government, hey, I'm working for this corporation. Can you help us out policy-wise? But they're doing everything but opening that door. And it's really crucial that we have a deeper understanding of how this whole network of shadow lobbying or consultancies work in the Capitol, in New York, in financial centers across the world.
I can't imagine anyone would disagree with it. We want more transparency. But how does that transparency, how is that transparency leveraged? I mean, it's, like I just, on some level, does it make a difference ultimately, or how would it make a difference if there was greater transparency and broader understanding of these dynamics?
So on a really narrow level, if there's a Microsoft breach, you can guard against that. If you know Jake Sullivan worked for Microsoft very narrowly by saying, hey, we're not going to have our national security advisor work on this Microsoft breach. But I think it raises bigger questions that, as you know, transparency is not enough to guard against the conceptual issue that if you have 20 people in the National Security Council who are working for private equity and hedge funds, are they doing corporate foreign policy, or is it a foreign policy for American people? And the rub here is that what Biden is pushing for is a foreign policy for the middle class, but it sure doesn't square with what a lot of his key personnel were doing in between, in the lead up to this administration.
Well, I mean, he seems to be pushing for, I think, a foreign policy that's in the center of the national security establishment. I mean, what has Biden done since entering office that has deviated from the very problematic mean of what foreign policy, the foreign policy blob, as people refer to it as, in Washington has coalesced around?
Well, so far, Biden's really been taking a middle road, and it feels a little bit like inertia. Like when we saw with the attack on Syria, it wasn't the most maximalist attack on Syria. He didn't decide not to do it. With a reprimand to Saudi Arabia over the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi, he did go ahead and do some kind of retribution, but it wasn't serious enough to really punish the crown prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. We're kind of seeing Joe Biden, the former Cold Warrior, the former Senate Foreign Relations, triangulator, and someone who really is, we could say responsible for a lot of the great mistakes of the Iraq War, responsible for a lot of mistakes of the Biden administration's middle of the road foreign policy. Now, it's too early to make really clear judgments of how bad or how good, we got to give them a little benefit of the doubt, things could be. But just looking at personnel as policy, I think there's some real concerns about the preponderance of consultants, a defense secretary who was on Raytheon's board, a number of people at the top echelons of power who are deeply connected to corporate influence. And my fear is that that's gonna push Biden ever more towards the middle.
Yeah, I think, my sense is that, and they just came out and I think said yesterday that there was no interest. They're not going to even deal with Israel and Palestine. I get the sense that
Venezuela, their position on that, Bolivia.
I get the sense that Joe Biden is like, my administration's not going to be about foreign policy, and it's just going to be on some level like, let's just not do much. And unfortunately, sort of just maintaining this trajectory is problematic because of all this, these type of personnel who fill in these seats. Jonathan Geyer, managing editor at the American Prospect, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you
so much.
All right, folks, that is our time for today. We will be back tomorrow to look back on this week. We will talk more about Joe Manchin and, of course, President Manchin, the domestic president.
And vice president parliamentarian.
Exactly.
Right.
And all this and more. But we will put links to the pieces that both Annelle Sheline and Jonathan Geyer have written into our description. And we will see you tomorrow. And for those of you sticking around, I'm going to skedaddle, and Emma's going to take over and marshal the fun half. And do we have Brandon Sutton's going to be on the fun half today?
Yes.
Got both Matt and Brandon.
Yes.
So we'll have Matt squared, Brandon, Brendan, and Emma. And Emma. Folks, don't forget, it is your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you support the free show. You get the free show free of commercials. We still put the links in there. So if you want to find out about, the comes in colors, masks and bags, you can find that in our podcast description. And then you get extra content like the fun half with Brandon Sutton and Matt Leck, Matt Binder, and Emma Vigeland and Brandon. So jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Check out the AM Quickie. And don't forget, Nomi's on vacation, but you go back, check out some of her past interviews on YouTube or Twitch, The Nomi Key Show. And so, Brandon, I want to apologize for apparently what happened last week. There was some type of confusion, and then I lost track, and it was all my fault. And, I'm glad you're taking it in stride. I'm glad.
You mean apologize to me? I thought you were apologizing to the fans. It's big of you to apologize to me, Sam, but you can just apologize to everyone else. I'm quite flexible. I've been stretching for a while.
I've already apologized to the fans yesterday, but I apologize to you, of course, Brandon, the host of what is the discourse, and or co-host, I should say. Folks can check that out at the Discourse. And Matt, old Matt, what is happening on Doomed?
Well, first I want to say, last week, boy, I don't know what happened. It's clear that without you, Brendan Finn, this show falls apart, because I just got the Zoom. I got the Zoom link literally after they were already in the fun half.
Wow.
I thought I was being pushed out by Emma and Matt Leck for a second. I wasn't sure if there was some sort of
Thursday coup.
Yeah, the coup didn't hold. We didn't really have the people, so
pretty harsh.
I figured I was ghosted.
This is pretty harsh Matt on Matt violence. That was.
Yeah, well, but
I rated him later in the evening, so.
Oh, there you go, Matt.
Okay, so you made up for it.
With the 20 people from Left Reckoning's Twitch feed.
Right. No, I'll take it. Every single person counts, That's why tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time at youtube.com/Matt Binder, also simultaneously multicast at twitch.tv/Matt Binder. We will be talking, you might notice nowadays that everyone's talking about boycotts, whether it's the right complaining about cancel culture from the left, or the right partaking in their own, AOK type boycotts, when Trump writes a little note saying that, we're not going to drink Coke or shop here or shop there or do this, do that. That's okay, I guess. But anyway, tonight on the show, we're going to look at all that. And we're going to look at the history of boycotts, especially when we go back and think about how the left organized, or how progressives, the broader progressive movement, not just the left, organized in like the mid to early 2000s, sort of, to take on, the Rush Limbaugh boycotts, the Glenn Beck boycotts. We're going to take a look at all that. youtube.com/Matt Binder, live tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time.
I hope you're going to cover there were right-wing boycotts too. This idea that somehow the conservatives didn't boycott is absurd.
Right, of course.
They were boycotting supermarkets, the Dixie Chicks. Everybody.
Oh, the Dixie Chicks.
Absolutely.
Matt Leck, what is happening in the Leckian media universe?
Tonight, check out Left Reckoning's YouTube page at 8 Eastern. We're talking to Nathan T. Bernard about the unabashed liberal union basher who was brought up by Maine Medical to stop their nurses from unionizing, and why that they should fail. And they kind of are shooting themselves in the foot in a lot of ways. So check that out. The story, 8 Eastern tonight, Left Reckoning. Subscribe on YouTube.
All right. I guess 646-257-3920. You will see these guys in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1 half. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
Do.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Hello, everybody. How is my frame rate? Is like my video stuttering here? I saw someone say that I was going in like weird motion here. Am I good? Do you see me?
It
moving?
seemed fine to me.
Okay, perfect. That's what matters then. So yeah, are the phone lines not open yet? All right, I'll do that. See, I never know now because Emma's learned the art of the phone call system, and now I don't know whether I should sign in or if she's taking it away or.
I'm doing call systems, but I think, yeah, you're first. So
I got it. Give me 1 second and I'm going to log in right now. So Brendan, Brandon, Matt, Emma, how are you all doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing fine. Just logging into these phones here. There we go. And all right, phone lines are open. 646-257-3920. Being that you I don't know what happened last week. Apparently they forgot to tell you about coming on the show, Brandon. Why don't you take it away with the first topic of the day?
Well, I mean, frankly, I think the first topic of the day should be me being ghosted. But that's just my bias towards myself. So, well, I think the first topic of the day we should begin with the filibuster. How about that? It came out yesterday or this morning, a Washington Post op-ed that Manchin is not open to, let's say, adjusting the filibuster in any way that alienates Republicans. And, I think that's poppycock. Matt, how about you?
I agree. I mean, Manchin is basically saying that he doesn't want anything to get done. I mean, maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he's just, he's secretly getting exactly what he would like to get, which is not have to take a position, I guess, even though it is taking a position. But, he thinks people are I think Manchin really does think he can have his cake and eat it too. And I think people are just, onto it now. Like, this isn't like, the early 2000s where people were just like, yeah, we voted for Obama. Our work here is done. And people just, logged off and signed out, I think a lot more people are paying attention to what goes on in Congress. And I think Manchin can't play that old early 2010s game anymore.
Well, yeah, and it just makes no sense because he literally a few weeks ago signaled and went on a media blitz and said he was in favor of the talking filibuster, which is a change. I'm not sure if he's aware of that.
Right. I saw recently, I can't remember, I was reading it like while I was out on my phone. I can't remember the exact percentages, but something like Manchin previously came out for like a 28%, like when Obama or Trump or something, like someone previously came out with like a 34% tax rate or something for corporations, and Manchin was like, no, that's too much. I put it at 28. And then now, fast forward now, Biden came out and was like, we're going to do a 28%, a tax rate. And now Manchin's out there going, 28% is too much. I put it at 24. Like, he just wants to be able to say, no, I called the shots. I didn't let, the crazy liberal Biden tell me what to do. I'm the one who's, the reasonable one getting us to the compromise position, when it's just not, like, it's just any number that's less than the number Biden or any other Democratic Party member to the left of Manchin puts out, honestly.
All the more reason for Biden to have started, just really quick, started at 35%, because then maybe you knew Manchin was going to water it down. So maybe start bigger than the compromise Manchin position.
Well, no, I agree with that point, Emma, but I also agree with Matt saying, I think that Manchin just loves attention. I think at this point, we've been at this game with him for going on 10, plus years of him being obstinate. And, through the pandemic, through the Obama years, it was kind of cute. But now that people are, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of another recession, the kind of game where not only are we focusing or have to account for this sort of entire party that's obstinate to any Democratic, forget even any leftist, but any Democratic attempt to make, America livable, we also have to deal with this sort of contingent of Democrats who want to play this game for attention. And I think people are tired of that. If the Republicans are a known quantity, sure, bipartisanship, maybe whatever. But Manchin being this member of the Democratic Party that also can't be really counted on, I think people have become tired of. And, for better or worse, I think the political media class has become tired of it, considering, partially his obstinate to Neera Tanden being given her rightful place in the, administration.
Right. And the weird, I totally agree with everything both of you said, honestly. And, the weird thing is, taking all that into consideration, is that, like, usually when someone is put into the Manchin position, they try to extract something for their voter base. In Manchin's case, the people of West Virginia. I mean, he can pretty much ask for anything he wants. And there's a good chance, if it's, reasonable, like, he probably won't get flying cars, but he could get a lot of money towards infrastructure and other things that would benefit the people of West Virginia. He doesn't put it out there. He doesn't ask for anything in return. He's just on this constant journey for some sort of in-between position that's not too far right, not too far left, but in the end doesn't really get him anywhere with the people of West Virginia. And I mean, I guess to his estimation, they do keep voting for him, but I mean, does he want to not deliver for them? I mean, maybe he doesn't care, as long as he gets into office and he's able to just toe that line in between Republican and Democrat.
I think you're right.
He's delivering for the business owners.
All right.
Yeah, definitely for that.
Daily, go on, Brandon.
I was just going to say, I agree with Matt's point. I think that, in some ways, well, I guess both Matt's points, he's A, delivering for the business owners, and B, I think that there is this cover that exists within a portion of the Democratic Party's ideology that allows for this middle position to be carved out. And it's assumed, more or less to be the most practical, pragmatic one. And, I think he just overplayed his hand too many times. You can only, obscure and distract and, sleight of hand your way out of the fact that you're preventing not just Obama's radical agenda, but now Joe Biden's moderate agenda from getting through just for attention.
Yeah, well, it is mostly for attention, but he wants attention from specific kinds of people. The Daily Poster has a scoop by David Sirota, basically says that Manchin got a bunch of money from private equity and then was given an award by a private equity lobbying group, and then apparently he's threatening to axe Biden's infrastructure bill unless it keeps tax breaks for private equity firms. So he's welcoming specific kinds of attention to get those kinds of accolades and potentially just money.
Right.
No, absolutely.
Right. Didn't the Biden administration just give his Manchin's wife, Mrs. Manchin, a position on some sort of board somewhere? I recall seeing this. I can't remember exactly what it was.
It is. Yeah, it was some sort of West Virginia board position, which people were kind of quibbling that she was unqualified for. I have no idea about her qualifications, but it seems clear what the implication of putting her on that board is. It just feels like the Bachelor, right? And Joe Manchin is the lame guy who's the lead, and everybody is just trying to suck up to him in increasingly embarrassing ways, and he makes bad decisions that end up hurting people in the end for no real reason. That's what the vibe I'm getting is.
Let me tell you, Emma, I'm a big reality TV show fan, but The Bachelor is the one show I have never actually sat through.
It's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I like it more for just the podcasts after where they make fun of everybody. So that's kind of what I'm in it for.
I can't watch
No, go ahead.
I just can't watch the ones that are entirely based around like relationship drama. If there's not some sort of outside stimuli that's giving them, new things to talk about. I think that Love Island and The Bachelor are just too much about, people's relationships. And no offense, it's a dating show. Like, a lot of it's just obviously fake in the way that if you give people like, let's say a ton of cash and ask them to carry it across the Arizona desert, that's not fake. Like, I know, like they're really sweating. Where like, I don't think that the people on The Bachelor are like really in love.
Are you a big Survivor guy?
Is Ton of Cash a show?
Yeah. That's a show?
Oh yeah, Ton of Cash is absolutely a show. It's only one season, but I think that it's probably the best distillation of reality TV. But just quickly to another point that Emma made, not related to reality television, which we can definitely talk about in the future. I think that that's true. And, that kind of appeal to these private interests, this appeal to this, like these moneyed interests that are trying to like infuse money into politics to further their goals is sort of why the overall narrative the Democratic Party pushes for bipartisanship becomes this veil to obscure these very, very cynical, very, very like financial interests in favor of like, well, if we get rid of the filibuster, the Republicans are going to be mad, when that's obviously a good thing, and B, not the core of the reason why we're trying to get, rid of it. Rather, that's not the core reason why they don't want to get rid of it.
Right. I do want to add that I feel like, how did The Bachelor make it this far? I mean, there's all those shows from like the 2000s and 2010s where you look back and you're like,
it's like an event, Matt. It's people sit down and I watch it live. I've got, and like a lot of my friends watch it and we'll text. We have a little text group about it. Yeah.
I feel like there'll be a point where we look back and we go, how did this show is not okay? How did this happen?
No. I totally understand the impulse. Real quick, everyone's favorite reality TV show, 1, 2, 3, The Amazing Race. Matt, go.
Matt.
Oh my God, I can't even tell you a reality TV show that's still on the air. Go, Emma. Let me think.
It's The Bachelor, and I don't feel like that's a good thing to say, but like I watch Real Housewives and The Bachelor, and that's kind of where I tap out. So I'm not, that's the staples, and then I watch a lot of sports. That's my life.
All right, I honestly am still drawing a blank. I don't watch reality TV. I can't.
I watch occasional reality TV because my girlfriend likes it. The one I'm watching now, I don't know if it's my favorite, but I can't think of the ones I've watched before. But Marriage or Mortgage, which is one of the most contrived, like, because it's clear that like what they do in like Apartment or House Hunters, for instance, that's another one. That's the one I watch. I don't know if that's technically reality TV, but I watch it all the time. But they have a couple who's clearly already bought a house, and then they just show them two others, and they pretend that they're interested in that, but then they actually live in the one that they want, right?
I love that farce, though. I do like House Hunters and HGTV content.
It's super.
We're not gonna badmouth House Hunters on the show while I'm on it. But yeah, Matt, go ahead.
But so yeah, Marriage or Mortgage is like, well, what if you had to make a decision between getting married or getting a house? And so, in certain cases, it's so obvious. Like there's one virgin couple that are like youth group leaders, and it's like, get married, you idiots! Like because you've mentioned, I've heard 3 times in this episode that you've never had sex with each other. I'm like, starting to get uncomfortable with it. So just like get married, right? But yeah, it's a bizarre show that doesn't work. It's extremely socially manipulative in terms of emotions, because it's like if they hear you had like you lost a father young, or your mother means something a lot to you, they'll just try to crowbar that into the wedding or the house in like the most crude way. But I'm addicted to it now.
I'm a little bit confused. I don't know of a religion that says sex before marriage is not okay, but also simultaneously says living with someone you're not married to but are in a relationship
so they were going to get
okay.
The farce was they were going to get a house, but she was going in the evenings back to her parents' place. To which I say, oh, that's when the guy just masturbates and watches porn for the rest of the night.
So I'm very familiar with this show, Matt. I've actually watched every episode of Marriage or Mortgage,
right.
And I agree with you that the conceit itself, once you see the like, I think the thumbnail come up on Netflix, which is what it's on, it's hard not to be engrossed by the conceit, because at its core, it doesn't make sense, I think. And then you watch it, and there's always an obvious correct answer. And I would say I disagree with you, Matt. I think the correct answer is just not to be on the show. But if you put a gun to my head and say you have to either get married or own a house, the house is just always the correct answer. But
absolutely,
what you forget about this show is that they're going to, sometimes they pick marriage, sometimes they pick house, it's basically divided evenly, is that this all took place right before COVID-19. And so every time they pick marriage and waste that money on a marriage, it's just like, it doesn't happen.
Right.
And that just enforces the point that it was just like a silly conceit to begin with, because a marriage can be, a wedding rather, can be ruined by any number of events, ranging from like snow to, I guess, a pandemic. And so, a lot of, all those brewery weddings got canceled.
You could postpone it too. Just get the house and then like 2 years later get married on the show.
You can have a marriage at your house in the backyard.
I don't even know if we want to play this, but I sent this in the chat. Have you seen these two virgins kissing for the first time on a TLC show?
Oh, let's not do this.
We'll keep that. Put that in the blog post.
Is it like the George Michael Maybe thing from Arrested Development with like the tongue and like the upper jaw?
I saw people just can Google it. I saw it and someone, the top comment is, it looks like two horses trying to eat a sugar cube, the same sugar cube. That's kind of the vibe. Anyway.
Emma, your mic is kind of low. Does anyone else hear that? Her mic is lower.
Sorry,
than
guys.
else's.
How's that?
Much better. Much better.
Okay.
Yeah. But now before we move on, I thought for a second, I just want to get this out here. The only reality TV show I think I ever really enjoyed and watched, well, other than WWE's Tough Enough, but we'll question whether that's reality TV.
I've also seen that.
Yeah. I think it's I can't remember the name of it. The one with Tim Gunn, the fashion show with Heidi Klum.
Project Runway.
Thank you. Project Runway. The early season, I haven't seen it in a long time, but the early seasons of that show were really good. That was a good show.
I was into America's Next Top Model as a kid, and I'm pretty sure it just like warped me in probably fairly negative ways.
I liked, I want to get in on this conversation too. I liked a Jersey Shore spinoff called Party Down South, which there was a few seasons of, and it was just like 8 Southerners in a house getting drunk.
Isn't that Florida Shore?
There's two of them. They're made by the same production company.
Jersey Shore is good too. Like, don't, play the hits. Jersey Shore is good too, Brendan. Would you agree?
Yeah, but that's I was in high school at the time, and that was like I felt like that was playing on stereotypes to a
Well, I'm from
uncomfortable
Jersey
degree.
too, and I got over that because it's excellent television.
But you have no Italian in you, so you don't understand the pain.
So I've only ever seen Floribama Shore because I can't find the first few seasons of Party Down South. It's an incredibly rare find. Ton of Cash is on various streaming services. There's only one season of it, and I think that it's like the best reality show I have ever seen, just based entirely on the conceit and also the characters. Conceit? The conceit is that it's a VH1 reality show or VH1 reality pilot season of a reality show. They took the contestants or the applicants for shows like, Flavor of Love or stuff like that, and was like, hey, what if we gave them the job / opportunity to win $1 million cash, where the general conceit is that they have to physically carry that cash as represented by like, a ton, a bundle, a bushel, a pallet of dollar bills, right? Brick by brick, box by box across various obstacles from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. And it's a master stroke, I think, of reality TV just distilled into like its core concept. Like, a bunch of people having to move money and fighting the whole way and then getting drunk and having other fights.
That does sound. It's on Tubi. I just saw. I was just reminded of my favorite reality show. The only one I watched like regularly live. It has a 2.6 rating on IMDb out of 10. Joe Millionaire. Anybody watch Joe Millionaire?
No.
So I remember watching this as a kid. I just got like a TV in my room. And basically it was this guy, this unscripted series sends 20 women to France for a whirlwind romance with a man who they think is a dashing millionaire. In reality, however, Joe Millionaire is a construction worker raised in humble surroundings with only limited financial security. It was excellent. I mean, I don't know why it got a 2.6. Maybe there's something extremely problematic about it, but I remember being hooked on it as a kid and thinking it was hilarious that all these women were misled into thinking he had a lot of money.
Was the guy's name on the show actually Joe Millionaire? Because that might have been the giveaway that he wasn't really a millionaire.
It was Joe Zora. So Joe Millionaire Zora.
Okay.
Interesting. Well, we can move on to clowns in actual reality if we'd like.
Do we have to? No,
I think we may have to. Maybe in the job description. So Dan Crenshaw went on Fox News, spoke to Brian Kilmeade about corporations and their stance in regards to the Georgia voter suppression laws, because, corporations are on the side of the left. We always know this. This makes sense. But the Republicans are trying to position themselves as anti-corporate renegades. Let's see what tactic Dan Crenshaw uses in order to make that case.
Big tech. And they're already grabbing Wall Street. Wall Street saying, take me, I'm yours. I want to change gears and get your opinion on this because you tweeted something about it. United Airlines wants to get a little bit more woke. They want to go out and say that 50% of their new hires from here on in are going to be women or people of color. United Airlines is officially stating this. They're planning to train 5,000 new pilots in a new pilot training program by 2030, of which at least half will be women and people of color. What do you think about this idea?
Look, I think just about every passenger that gets on a plane thinks to themselves, I hope the pilot is qualified and can take off and land the plane safely. Look, if they want a virtue signal, that's fine. What really pissed me off about United was the way they lied about the election integrity reforms that we're trying to make in places like Georgia and Texas. They lied about it. They insinuated that these were voter suppression laws. And of course, that's not true. Clearly, they didn't read it. And again, they're venturing into territory that they don't understand. That they know nothing about, and in an attempt to what? This is what I call the phenomenon that's going on. It's progressive fascism, because what is fascism? Well,
yes,
it's the regimentation of the economy, of society, and it's the forced suppression of your opposition. That's what's happening right now. The Democrats have successfully captivated the institutions, pop culture, Hollywood, our education institutions, and now our corporations into their own woke agenda. This is fascism, right? And they use cancel culture as a tool to impose.
Or the Frankfurt School anti-Semitic myths is what Crenshaw's doing here. So I'd say Crenshaw's doing closer to fascism, but
yes.
Into their own woke agenda. This is fascism, right? And they use cancel culture as a tool to impose their fascism on us. And so they're always using this anti-fascist labeling against the right, but they're the ones who actually engage in the tactics. And it's time we expose that. That's really what's happening here, and we should see it for what it is. Look, if they want to hire based on quotas and virtue signal to us and imply that people didn't have these opportunities to begin with, fine, but don't lie about other policy. Okay, that's what I really have a problem with.
If Republicans don't unite, understand what you said is actually fact, not opinion, they're going to get steamrolled and lose everything. They did not have a bad election. You did not have a.
Yeah, like I had the thought where I said, why didn't he just go with totalitarianism or something like that? Something that could actually, in some way, maybe be able to fit into the square peg via the round hole that he's trying to use. Like it's wait, that's not right. But I digress. I mean,
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, the fascist label is so easily disprovable, especially when you have Dan Crenshaw, who like pushes nationalist policies on a daily basis and racist policies at that. Like he's not even trying to make it make sense, is what I've decided. He's trying to muddy the waters on what fascism even means and retool what had been used in order to talk about the Trump era policies.
What I really enjoy about this clip is, and I don't know if he realized he did it or not, but this is a big step for them to realize this to begin with. So I'll give Crenshaw a little credit here. He qualified, I should say, fascism that he's talking about as progressive fascism, meaning, I mean, if you have to do that, you're admitting that fascism is usually a right-wing thing.
Yes.
So he's just angry, really, that we're the real fascists here, and in my view, progressives are on to what we're doing, and they're trying to take what we've been doing and force it into their own agenda onto us. They've turned the tide here. They're using our own fascism against us now, and we can't let them do this.
What I find interesting about that clip, despite the fact that he pouts like, a child towards the end there for a full 20 seconds after he stops speaking, is that, despite the new label that they're giving it, cancel culture, like the left is silencing us and, corporations are using progressive fascism, this kind of anxiety that the sort of post, World War II far right has about the, let's just put out there like the basic social liberalism that has taken over pop culture and has taken over, branding and marketing and ads and like music and just like, your workplace diversity as some kind of heralding of the end is as old as the far right. It's kind of what binds them all together. And them portraying it as though it's the, that corporation is doing what they're doing, whether it's United having some kind of training program aimed at getting more people of color or women as pilots is, all well and good. But this concern, this very, I would say Gramscian concern that they're losing control of the hegemony, put in conversation also with their attempts to disguise the fact that they're losing this demographic battle through these, regressive voter suppression laws that are going around the country, which Dan Crenshaw himself benefits from in the form of gerrymandering in his district, which looks, like the Sailor Moon fucking star, like I'm sorry, her staff, right? Has anyone seen it? It looks like a sickle. But hearing it together, like, yeah,
Brandon, that's your cue to pull up that Crenshaw map right there.
Like him just saying, like, we don't like we're fighting a two-pronged battle here. We're fighting the demographic war in the term of literal political vote by vote, district by district gerrymandering, and we don't like the fact that that ability to obscure the fact, rather, we don't like the fact that our ability to obscure the fact that we're losing that demographic battle, in the form of more people of color getting into positions of power, more people voting, more Latinos voting, et cetera, et cetera. We don't like that we can't disguise that in movie ticket sales, that we can't make like the latest PragerU Adam Carolla movie do as well as like some socially liberal movie like, Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four. And like, that's just their entire albatross, that they have all this power in the political field that, they have to defend, obviously, with a lot of, incredibly regressive laws. But even if they are capable of defending that, like their seats, their faux 50% silent majority or whatever, they can't translate that into people buying their books. They can't translate that to people like watching their movies, and they'll never be able to do that, right? So the complaint that this is a leftist thing is just them trying to disguise what is largely just a practical appeal to people who look like them by companies, by putting them in their marketing as some sort of ideological thing distinct from capitalism, is just, what they're always going to have to do, right? Because otherwise they're criticizing what they believe in.
They make it fascism. They have to label it as progressive fascism in order to hide their aggrievement that they can't be represented in those parts of like culture. I mean, fascism apparently this week is whatever you want it to be, just like infrastructure. That's what I'm getting out of these conversations.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, like fascism, they know on the far right, which is why they actively try to sow fascist language and, into modern discourse.
Well, they just don't want you to call it fascism.
Exactly, because they know the truth that fascism is the most discredited political ideology of the 20th century. You can't call yourself a fascist. And once people identify fascism in you and your ideology, most of them really don't like it. All they can really do is muddy the waters around what fascism is until, it becomes indistinguishable from what they're just calling republicanism or like MAGAism or Trumpism, because they know that if it becomes identifiable as fascism, what they get is what happened between the first march for the right and the second march from the right. It goes from like a bunch of people coming to very few people coming, and then hundreds of thousands of counter protesters.
Right. Right. That's a great point. And to add to that, the word they try to, they do know that fascism is a word that is not good for them to use to describe themselves. So they're trying to take back nationalism or call themselves nationalists. Because, that means they just love the nation. They just love the nation. Who doesn't love America?
Yeah, I like Brendan's point, because all this, whining they're doing is basically just to maintain a cultural gerrymander that they've been afforded by the major media institutions in this country for far too long on all sorts of issues. And they've got a good foothold. Dan Bongino and Ben Shapiro just own, trending on the biggest propaganda machine in world history.
Right.
Yeah, but the truth is, you can maybe get enough viewers to believe far right, nonsense to be the highest watched news program in America, because people don't really watch news here. But you'll never be able to like have a major blockbuster or a watch television show or any kind of, or like a best-selling book that you're super packed in by yourself. It's just the nature of the beast. A lot of these grifts are interpersonal, or they only can sustain you artificially with the help of billionaires.
And they want to make the conversation about culture, and yet they have an inability to access that culture. And that's what they can, how they can paint their aggrievement. Go on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, culture obviously has a feedback, is in a feedback loop with politics and voting and et cetera. But, that feedback loop has been heavily altered by our gerrymandering as well. So, it's not as though this is not a key to them gaining or solidifying more power. So like this anxiety, I would say from a practical standpoint, is warranted. But a lot of these people who are engaging in this kind of discourse are just like, they personally want to be able to sell a book or get a date or have like, a large audience of sycophants who don't, also contain a bunch of people who just watch them to make fun of them.
Right. As a conservative, I'm sick and tired of this cancel culture stuff. We really have to spend more time on, boycotting Lil Nas X and Nike for teaching our children about Satan via a shoe. I mean, that's really the argument, right? It's always, what they view as uncouth needs to be taken away. And that's not cancel culture. That's just, saving the republic or saving our good Christian values. But, when it's something that, they don't agree with, when they do agree with, then that's got to be blasted everywhere, because otherwise you're canceling me unfairly.
I mean, we do need to bring attention to the scourge of shoes, Matt. Obviously, the far right has not co-signed the legality of being barefoot, but that's just another, I would say, hole in their logic. They're always talking about freedom of speech, but when it comes down to like fight for the abolition of the informal no shirt, no shoes, no service label, they're nowhere to be found. So like, how can they really claim to care for, I hate to say it, the soul of America?
Well, you know who was barefoot?
Me right now?
Jesus.
Oh yeah, that's true too.
Also,
happy belated Easter.
Yeah, it's like the amount that I don't care about Easter as an adult is it's immeasurable.
Pretty sure because my parents aren't hiding anything.
Sandals though. Right.
That's Jesus sometimes had sandals, but I think he was barefoot. That's like, we'll have to ask the historians on
Well, I mean, per the famous 2 sets of footprints in the beach, I think he was barefoot in that one at least.
I mean, you could leave footprints. You could leave footprints while wearing sandals. They never quite say that. They show the outlines of his toes in the poem.
So you're a sandal truther?
There we go.
You're implying that I'm sorry, I was gonna say Bigfoot, but you're implying that Jesus wears those like little like slipper sock shoe things that were popular for like half a minute in the mid 2010s.
It's totally possible. I don't know. I mean, Jesus was just like everybody else. He could have went to the beach and taken off his sandals to walk in the sand barefoot. But then once he left the beach, put his sandals back on. It's not like he was walking around barefoot 24/7.
Beaches were cleaner back then.
That is the eternal dilemma, though, right? You want to walk barefoot on the beach, but sometimes it's too hot for your feet.
I don't like the beach, actually.
Before we get to the beach, I just want to say Brandon raises the interesting subject of, is Jesus just Bigfoot? Is Bigfoot just Jesus all these years later and hasn't shaved?
It's possible. I will say that you'll know if Matt Binder carried you, because I will not be barefoot on the beach. I wear footwear at the beach. Sand's hot, man. Sand is hot. I don't like that feeling on my feet.
Pretty much like everything about the beach. I'm a big beach head.
I don't like sand.
I think
it's a little coarse.
Yeah, I'll be sunburned throughout the months of June through August here in the studio. Just a heads up to everybody. We'll see if I can hide it with makeup.
I mean, you don't have to be sunburnt to enjoy the beach. I hope you know that. I mean,
no, I know, but I think I always push it to, like, I never know my limits, even though I've been burned literally multiple times.
As you get older, you got to take care of your skin. All sorts of things that can happen. You're youthful. You won't be able to. You have to take care of your skin. I don't know what to say. That's what I've been taught.
I know, and it's not even the beach. I'll like go and lay in the park or something like that and just get burned. Idiot. Anyway,
I mean, you could do that. Just wear sunscreen, Emma. Just wear sunscreen. That's Big Brother.
Even
Matt
when
Binder
I do
telling
that,
me what to do here.
Even when I do that, it's I'm fair.
You gotta get you a sun shirt and one of those one of those big hats.
Absolutely not.
All right, let's go to the phones. 318. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can everyone else hear you? Emma, Matt?
This is
anyone?
Eve.
I can hear him.
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. Hi, Eve. Is that what you said?
So this is Eve. That's correct.
Hi,
from
Eve.
Boston.
Eve from Boston. What would you like to talk about?
So yesterday, at least Emma and Sam, I believe, discussed a clip from Tucker Carlson and the governor of Arkansas about the new bill. So the governor vetoed. It's called, I believe, the Save Adolescents from Experimentation Act is the title.
Right.
Of the bill. And there was some confusion. Tucker claimed to be citing an article he just read that claimed that, in his words, something along the lines of the vast majority of children who don't take hormones end up not being trans, which
Yes,
That makes a
and
lot of
we
sense.
said
But,
yes, of course.
right. Well, so I'm a researcher in trans issues. I'm a trans woman myself. And I thought that it might be useful to offer a little bit of further information on what the actual debate is.
Sure, I think
Because
he
it is
didn't speak.
a discussion.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your information just to remind the audience, and then you can dive into it. Yeah, Tucker Carlson cited something. He must have misspoken in order to like kind of out conservative, because it didn't make any sense, is why, it sounded like he was making the case that leftists
Right.
would make. What was he trying to say in terms of trans discrimination and that topic?
So the talking point that would be used by people who understood the issues at least would be that there is a very high rate of trans identified youth. So youth that are either this is the issue. There's a lot of conflation. So youth or children that are either diagnosed with what that used to be gender identity disorder that's no longer recognized by the DSM, now would be gender dysphoria. And significantly, those are different things. And there's a lot of debate within the field about how likely it is for a child that is diagnosed with gender identity disorder or gender dysphoria, a gender nonconforming youth, to retain a trans identity as they age. And as you might see, there's already like a lot of like term confusion.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think a lot of the confusion comes from. So the governor was right in one aspect in which there does need to be more research done in this field, but he is also right to veto the bill. So the research that exists right now suggests that a lot of kids who are referred to gender clinics will end up identifying as cis later in life, which is obviously like a very limited or a very like broad group of people. So it isn't the case that what Tucker was kind of intimating was that the kids, what the argument would be was that kids that take hormones or take puberty blockers would be very, very likely to later not be trans. And that is not true.
Right.
That is not the case.
Right.
By the time someone is around age 15 or 16, which is usually when hormones are, if they're an adolescent, that's the earliest age they're going to start receiving cross hormone therapy. And by that time, it seems that almost everyone who identifies as like a gender other than that's what they were assigned at birth, or who like reports very strong feelings of gender dysphoria, persistent feelings of gender dysphoria, is going to remain with those experiences and is ultimately going to identify as transgender. And that's the purpose of puberty blockers, which were actually developed many years ago for use on cis people, which is something they don't tell you. There's a number of health conditions that cause early puberty, which can be detrimental to cisgendered people. And so that's why we have puberty blockers to begin with. This is not like new medicine.
So
it is.
Yeah. I'm just curious where he got that, like what numbers was he specifically distorting there? That the overwhelming, was he trying to say that go on.
So one number that gets cited a lot is that, or one thing that gets said a lot, for instance, will be that 80% of kids who like identify as trans will later stop identifying as trans. And that's not true. That's not what the data that we have says. And the data that we have is also problematic in the way that it's often been presented and interpreted, even within the field, for a lot of complex reasons. We do need more research on it. So if you have, for instance, a child who is who's like refusing to sort of conform to gender stereotypes, as like a 6 or 7 year old, maybe their parents take them to a gender clinic. Okay, fine. And odds are, it seems to be, based on the data we have, odds are they're going to end up identifying as a cis person. But the older they get, while identifying, while displaying and claiming dysphoria, and while claiming an identity of a gender other than that assigned by birth, the more and more likely it is that that is going to stick.
Right. So I just want to make sure I have this right, because that's really, you know, that's it right there. I think what you just said, like the right wants you to believe that there is this overwhelming amount of children who are saying, I am transgender, I'm transgender, you know, I want to go through the therapies and all this, and they go to this clinic because they want to, they say they're transgender, and then later on they come out and say, oh no, I was wrong, I'm actually cis. But that's, you know, that's what they want you to believe. But what you're saying is what actually happens is really young kids who don't even like this thought probably doesn't even pop into their mind yet, is just not conforming to the, you know, the general gender stereotypes. So their parents take them to these clinics worried that their kid might be, you know, be a transgender person. And, you know, obviously if that's the case,
or that they're having trouble fitting in, or that it's distressing them, or that they just don't know what to do. And there are young kids. I myself was very young and had a very strong sense of dysphoria, and had a strong sense of like wishing to be the gender that I present as now, which is female.
Right.
But that's not everyone, and that's not persistent for everyone.
Let me just add my anecdote. I went through 2 years where I dressed like a boy. Like I was obsessed with Shaquille O'Neal, and I would wear his jersey all the time, and I cut off all my hair, and I wore cargo shorts. And you know, my mom thought that might have been my path, and it ended up not being. So I would have been the you know, like statistics cited by Tucker Carlson completely disingenuously here.
All because you liked Michael Jordan and wanted to wear a basketball jersey.
Yeah. Sorry, what'd you say, Eve?
Earlier, so earlier iterations of like gender identity disorders, like diagnostic criteria, were broader than the current diagnostic criteria for gender dysphoria. And some of that can just be that you refuse to enact gender roles. It didn't require a child to state their own gender, for instance, which the current gender dysphoria requires sort of like a statement of identity, it being necessary for a diagnosis of gender dysphoria.
Gotcha.
And there are problems with the way that gender dysphoria is presented in the DSM. There's problems with the DSM in general. But it is not the case that any sort of treatment is being forced on kids all of a sudden. I don't know if your audience is very familiar. The sort of standard for treatment right now in states and developed countries that allow this is that if a child is prepubescent, there is no medical intervention. You just let the kid be. There's a pretty significant data that forcing them into a gender identity or gender behavior, like, you know, gender coded behaviors that they don't like, is really bad for them. And so many psychologists will recommend just taking the child's lead and seeing where they go, supporting them in the activities they want, how they want to dress, what they want to be called. Fine, there's no medicine involved. After puberty starts, after what's sometimes described as like a natal puberty, after a puberty that is sort of not concordant with the gender identity of the child begins, then you can consult with a doctor, a specialist, who may or may not prescribe puberty blockers. Puberty blockers are reversible. They've been used on cis people for decades. There is some possibility of very limited side effects, but they're far safer than almost any other medical intervention that we have, just generally speaking. And so you can assign puberty blockers to give the child more time to develop emotionally and their identity, intellectually, until usually they're about 15 or 16. would be the standard for if they are still insistent that they want to medically transition, they can start HRT. And no one gets bottom surgery until they're adults, until they're over the age of 18. And very few people get top surgery on trans men, so like a double mastectomy, until they're over that age. That depends on the state because we have different laws about consenting to surgery in different states. But it's never children. It's never little kids.
Now, I know you said there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of the data, but is there data that represents the conservative argument that there is this vast number of children or teenagers who think they're transgender, go through the treatments, and then come out later and say they're cis? I mean, I'm just gonna guess, I don't know, but I'm gonna guess this is a scenario that happens less than the voter fraud epidemic that they're all worried about as well. I mean, it just seems like something.
So the general rate of regret for medical transition, depending on specifically what procedures you're talking about and which studies you look at, the general rate for like regret and detransition ranges between 5% and like 0.3%, depending on specifically how you're framing what regret means and what detransition means, which is lower, for instance, than the number of women who regret having children.
Right.
Another long-term, life-changing decision.
Yes.
Right. So it's a relatively, compared to other significant medical procedures, it's overwhelmingly the case that people don't regret it. It also shows a very heavy sociological and psychological well-being. Reduced people who undergo these treatments tend to show reduced distress, reduced anxiety, reduced depression, reduced prevalence of eating disorders, self-harm, suicidality, all these things, reduction in dysphoria.
Yeah,
So
and
for the
Matt,
most part,
you make your point, Matt. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, my understanding is some of the regret factors are people not accepting like what they've done, basically, too, and like the sort of social ostracization. Is that right? That actually, if we were just more accepting of people, some of that those regret numbers would be even lower.
Yeah, so the data is pretty limited in that regard, but the current data does suggest that more than half of the very small percentage of people who do regret it or do detransition, more than half of those people detransition due to oppression, prejudice, loss of family, abuse and violence and harassment they receive, and another chunk of them also because they can no longer access medical care. They don't have the option to maintain the treatment that they need. So they find it that their only option is sort of to live in their, assigned gender.
All right. Eve, thank you so much for this call. It was really a really great call. Tons of important and really clarifying and eye-opening in some ways information that really, I think, puts, I think just straight up debunks a lot of what the right is pushing out there. I mean, we can all say that we know that the right is, lying about this stuff, but to see, someone being able to put it out there. So, with the data and as eloquently as you did, it just, I don't know what their argument could be against you, to be honest.
Sure. If anyone's ever interested, I don't know, I can email resources or anything for that if any of y'all need that.
Sure.
But thank you for letting me come on.
Matt and Brendan, what is the email to send to? Majority Reporters?
At Gmail, yep.
majorityreporters@gmail.com, Eve.
Cool. I'll try to send you guys just a little bit of data on the topic.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. As Matt said, great call.
Thank y'all. Have a great day.
You too.
Take care.
Take care. All right, let's go back to the phones we'll take another caller because we've only done one call so far, if you could believe it. Let's go to 818. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey guys, Dave from Jamaica. How you guys doing?
Dave from Jamaica, doing great. What would you like to talk about today, my friend?
Well, very informative call to follow up on. So, but I'm sorry for Matt and Emma's failed coup attempt. You know, so,
Yeah.
keep trying, though.
No harm, no foul, right? I'll just try again, backed by the United States government.
Yeah, the OAS wasn't taking my calls.
Yeah.
So, I guess since we had a pretty serious topic, I think I'll trivialize it a little bit. Not the previous topic, but the I think distinctions between reality shows is false, though. I think they're all the same thing. It's all relationship drama at the end of the day. Because I remember when I used to watch all the competition shows, what they focused on, whether it be dudes shooting guns at targets or whatnot. It's, I don't like this dude, and I don't like this chick. It's all the same stuff.
Right.
Different engines to get you there.
Damn, man. Yeah, you really got deep there. Really got deep.
Unless,
It's all the same.
Just to throw a wrench in here, if you consider like game shows to be reality TV, which I do, there's game shows that aren't necessarily like that, like Wipeout and like the Ninja, whatever it is, where it's just like one person trying to defeat an
That stuff is
obstacle course.
awesome.
Yeah, like that's not relationship stuff. That's just watching
Wipeout
someone.
is.
Yeah.
I guess I watch more reality TV than I thought.
Sorry, I didn't catch. Sorry, I didn't catch.
I was gonna say
Binder.
I said Wipeout and like Ninja Warrior, like those shows. They're like game shows, but they're like reality TV as well. But there's no relationship stuff in there. What were you gonna say, Brandon?
Well, here's what I had. I'm sorry for jumping off for a second. I had to go to the bathroom. Excuse me. But I was listening, so I heard this, and I have to jump in. I disagree. I think that broadly speaking, while the human element is obviously a part of any reality show, because that's just like human. That's why it makes it a reality show. They fit into sort of like three broad like categories. All relationship, all person drama. So stuff like Big Brother in the Real World and like The Bachelorette and Love Island, non-skilled competition shows. So stuff like game shows, stuff like Survivor and like Fear Factor. And then you have skilled competition shows. So stuff like Chopped and like Hell's Kitchen, and while in things sort of go rather hybridize between those threes, sort of like rogue, mage, tank, but generally speaking, I think those are the three big ones. So like you can have something that is both relationshipy and game showy, like I don't know, what's a good example of that? Really, I guess Love Island has like an actual like cash prize and they swap around like stuff, which makes it distinct from something like Jersey Shore.
Right. There's no goal in Jersey Shore. It's just to provide television and entertainment. Like
It's to smash or smush. Sorry, that they say smush there.
Please.
That's
smush,
like,
which is way grosser. Which is way grosser.
Yeah,
that's like their personal goals, but that's not like the goal stated in the show. Like this is what they need to do to win. That's just like what they want to do, like their own personal achievements.
Did anybody watch Love Is Blind?
I was about to say, but what? One sec. Sorry, Dave, what were you saying?
Yeah, Dave from Jamaica is regretting this one.
No. Just a slight change of topic. Brendan, you brought up that Crenshaw's district is shaped like something out of Sailor Moon or Sickler or something like that.
Yes,
Looking back at my childhood memories, now I'm beginning to wonder why Tuxedo Mask always had depth perception problems. I think I found out who he is really now.
Right. All right. If you think about it, that meme that shows what was his name? Tuxedo Mask, right? That meme where he's like my work here is done, and Sailor Moon's like, but you didn't do anything. That seems like it captures Crenshaw pretty good, how he's always like pumping himself up and pounding his chest as some like conservative hero. But really, I can't name a single accomplishment he's had. Like he's just become a big like online personality figure, but what the hell has he done in Congress? I can't name you a single thing.
Maybe it's a lack of seeing him all the way through. Like maybe we're only getting half the picture with Crenshaw.
Hasn't he done like war criminal advocacy? Maybe I'm wrong about
war criminal advocacy.
Like him and like Hexeth and Fox News.
Probably.
Yeah, like aren't they like?
I remember. So go ahead.
No, I that's all I remembered. So you can go.
I just remember that time where there was like a big salmonella scare because of like a ice cream recall in Texas, and he had a whole photo shoot where he ate a bunch of that ice cream to prove that it was safe and that people getting salmonella, I guess, or whatever the foodborne illness was from it was and related. It was were just snowflakes. That's like all I know him from.
Right. Well, he recently, I do remember seeing him. He was recently on Mehdi Hassan's MSNBC show where he was like really taken to the woodshed. I don't know, he came to talk about the border crisis, which I'm sure he called it there, and which it's not, but and Hassan really let him have it. Like he came completely unprepared, knowing this was like, that's why he had him on. Like they had a back and forth online, if I recall correctly. And Mehdi Hassan was like, why don't you come on my show and we'll discuss. And Crenshaw came without any data, just spouting his talking points. And he looked really dumb, but I mean, that's regular. That's a normal thing for these guys,
Yeah, it's almost as if moderating racist Facebook pages doesn't prepare you to be a national political figure.
Right.
Yeah, and and that's like you'd expect it would, right? Because that's all there is, like debates on Facebook, but that's an echo chamber, obviously.
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's a good point, right? Because that's also kind of loops into the conversation we were having earlier about his issue with, liberal cultural hegemony in academia, and then like the, generally speaking, like the entertainment industry. But like Matt brought up, in the political media space, usually, rather, it's kind of a toss up whether Dan Crenshaw gets taken to task for even the most basic, stupid fallacies that he is espousing, or they just sort of present like, well, that's just his opinion, one side says this, the other side says this. So I could see why he wouldn't necessarily always be ready for the former thing to happen, because it is not as consistently an issue for him as it should be, because usually the media is okay with propping up, the political media is okay with propping up this dog race, he said, she said narrative, which requires a lot of bias towards towards people like Dan Crenshaw, who often come with nothing but a series of like half remembered, online grievances.
But Brendan, would you say, I guess in this era, at least for the conservatives,
Brandon.
Yeah, we need to make this distinction.
Brandon, sorry. Brandon. Yeah, Brandon. Mr. Sutton, I think I'll with the focus of the culture war that the conservatives seem to be on. But I've noticed, it's, at least in my view, at least with the mainstream media, it seems to be getting less and less effective. At least they seem more like a joke, or is that more due to the circles I'm in?
Well, I mean, I think, they're getting worse and worse at it, but I think partially that is because there are less people who are amenable to those kinds of arguments, because time is just, in this aspect, time is kind of leaving them by just by nature of more and more people, society becoming more diverse, but also because a lot of it, more maybe so than previously, is about promoting a very, very specific type of personal brand that is kind of untethered from any real, intellect. Right. It's just easier nowadays to only be, this is going to sound silly. It's easier nowadays for your entire brand to be racist. Back in the day, racists usually also had to do other things. Nowadays, you can get famous only whining about cancel culture. You don't have to also be like, I don't know. Let's go back to the founding fathers, writing the Declaration of Independence. The racists of the past were obviously it's still hegemonic, but the people who they cite as being their influences had other jobs besides being professionally racist online. Nowadays, that's just a big portion of conservative media and conservative, political sphere. That's not to say that's not to glorify the past conservative academics out there. It's to say that there used to just be a little bit more effort put into disguising their stupid bigotry. Nowadays, there's just not even the veil or illusion of that kind of deep thought. It's just all surface level impulse as just, the conservative party has abandoned the, I would say the argument of an intellectual, compassionate right in favor of just like online grievance politics. I think that would be the distinction between like your never Trump Republicans and your like, Dan Crenshaw type base MAGA people. Like the never Trump Republicans want to pretend that there's some idealized past of like deep conservative thought when, there isn't, but, at least they write in full sentences and are multisyllabic in their racism versus the people like Dan Crenshaw who, may or may not be able to actually read a book.
With the view of that, then, Mr. Sutton, then would it be that is this showing that the conservative movement is stronger now that they don't have to wear that mask, or is this a sign of them weakening?
I don't know if they're weakening or stronger. It's like certainly things are getting dumber, but I would say it's true about a lot of stuff. People it seems like people tried a little bit harder in the past, at least to disguise their more base impulses. I think a lot of that stuff, considering how hegemonic it is, has continued unabated with very little challenges. I think that now, due to the, existence of an arguable liberal bias in like movies in the most like shallow Democrat sense of the word, it's easier for people like that to exist in this, more diversified political media space that allows for like I said, like someone to just have an entire career singularly as a person through crowdfunding or something like that. It's just the Instagramification of like this kind of, political racism, where I don't know if you could be so singularly focused in your entire career in the past, if that makes any sense. But I'm very young, so I might just be making that up. It just feels like, it's a kind of bigotry that like is just a meme. It gets very surface level, and they don't even have any like gestures towards understanding like the genealogy of conservative thought. Not that it matters, because they end up at the same position. So it's like, it's hard to see, like, again, this is like that faux distinction between Trumpism and Mitch McConnellism, where it's like they'd see the distinction, I would argue, internally between people like Jan Crenshaw and the more respectable elements of the right. But, I wouldn't, in terms of like actual impact, in terms of, messaging. Yeah, they are certainly like, dumber in the senses, in the ways that we identify as dumber, like, knowing things. If that makes sense. I might just be like, rambling.
All right.
No, it does.
No, it makes sense. So it makes sense. It's giving me a lot to contemplate. But all right, crew, thanks for taking my call. I'll have to sit and think about this. But thanks.
Thanks for the call.
Thanks, Dave.
Don't think too hard about it, because I certainly did not when I was trying to get it out there.
All right, let's.
It reminds me of this National Review story, which is like, this is like the story they've been just rewriting for the last like a half a century plus. But Kevin Williamson, why not fewer voters? The fact that voters got us into this mess. I mean, it's Kevin Williamson. People should look him up. Chapo's done him a number of times. But yeah, like it's hard. Kevin Williamson is this like, that's the smart conservative now. He's like, he looks like a magician.
All right.
Yeah, there's like a general lowering of the bar.
Bar's always been low. What's that meme?
Yeah.
The astronauts, right? Bar's always been that low. Let's take one more call, I guess, and then we'll see how much time we got, if we do another clip or not, and then that's the show. Cool. Let's go to 352. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey guys, can you guys hear me good?
We can hear you now, but you cut out for a second. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Oh shit! Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you now. Yep. What's your name? Where are you calling
Hello?
from?
I can hear you.
Yep. Oh,
okay,
boy.
cool. Ken from Florida.
Hey, Ken from Florida. What would you like to talk about today?
Hey, so I called in a couple months ago to talk about the water thing going on in Florida.
Oh,
so
right,
basically what's going on is, so I called in right before Swanee River Water Management District had an important vote to determine whether Nestle can pump 1 million gallons from the Ginnie Springs Aquifer, Swanee River area up here in north central Florida. And so that happened, right after I called in, they voted to unanimously to allow Nestle to have the permit. Just wanted to call in an update. And, you know, what's basically going on is there's this conflict of interest between the Swanee River Management District and private industry, because every board is appointed by the governor. So they were appointed by DeSantis and Rick Scott. So it's really undemocratic. And they also have a scientist working for them who did research which determined that pumping an additional million isn't going to have a significant effect on wildlife. And so basically, there's also the Florida Springs Institute, which is a private nonprofit, which does similar research.
Hey, you cut out, man.
Yeah, I think we might be having a tough time talking to Binder.
That might be Binder, yeah.
So yeah, do we have let's see here.
Oh no,
Hey
Binder.
Matt, can you hear us?
What's going on?
You were cutting out.
You're
sorry,
cutting out, Matt.
Binder
I'm
cut
cutting
out.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh.
So yeah, we might want to try to summarize a little bit what we cut out and
Yeah.
wrap up.
Yeah, quick. Get a couple more sentences if you can, and just like wrap it up. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so the Springs Institute does its own independent research and finds that there is a huge impact of additional pumping. And so we really need to do whatever we can to pressure this Swanee River Management District to get rid of this permit. And I think you guys will be interested that the biggest water pumping permit is actually held by a Bill Gates farm. So yeah, that's really the big issue is that
what farm? You cut out
farm
there.
owned by Bill Gates.
Oh, right.
Bill Gates.
Christ.
Yep. So he owns a bunch of land up here too. And I just think it's funny that the other day Kamala Harris was saying we're going to start having wars over water. So they clearly know that they want all the corporations to have control over the water. And when I talked to the Swanee River Management District, they were saying, oh, well, water is publicly owned, but that doesn't mean that a private corporation can't go through all the legal protocols to get a permit to pump 1 million gallons from the aquifer. So I don't know. I don't think we need to go to war over water if we can just conserve water. But maybe Kamala Harris disagrees. So I don't know.
We have that clip
I just wanted to call in and give that.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for the call.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it.
I'll let you guys go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You got? Do we have that clip? Do you want to get to that clip?
Honestly, I think it's an interesting conversation. So it wasn't in our sheet, but it was from yesterday. You guys have that?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So Kamala Harris had a bit of a foreboding statement the other day about what war we're going to wage over next. I think you could frame this in a very different way than she framed it, but let's take a listen to what she had to say.
And here's the other thing, because I also, I'm in a lot of meetings on foreign policy. For years and generations, wars have been fought over oil. In a short matter of time, they will be fought over water. So when we think about building up our economy around our infrastructure on something like water policy, it's literally about jobs. It's about the fundamental source of life that Tammy Duckworth was talking about. It will sustain life. And it's about strengthening up our nation around a commodity that is a precious commodity.
Was that a threat?
Yeah,
Was that a threat?
It sounds like a
Because, I mean,
threat.
here's
And
the-
at the end, she says, I didn't even think she would be that clear about it. She said it's a commodity. She made it quite clear that she views water as a commodity. And I mean, that's kind of the limitations of her and the Joe Biden's administration's way of thinking about things and our economic systems.
I love the
I think-
talking about it like it's just hands off from the U.S. Like, yeah, there were wars fought off oil. A lot of them. Who the perpetrator? One of the biggest perpetrators of that? I mean, you gotta be kidding me. And then to
Passive
just go on
voice.
Right, and then to go on and say, and there'll be next to be wars over fought over water. I mean, I don't know how else you could read that other than a threat.
Well, no, it's a threat. And I mean, I agree about the passive voice because it also implies that, like, why are there going to be wars fought over water? Like, is there less water in some way that's distinct from the general climate emergency that we're having, or the rampant, pollution that's going on? Like, or, is that just or is the lack of water just one symptom of the general climate emergency that we're, currently hurtling towards and experiencing? Like, because if you're asking, rather, because we're already having, not we're, but like the global context already has wars over water, and wars as the result of diminishing natural resources due to climate change, and migration caused by climate change, et cetera, et cetera. And those, so I think it's important to highlight the point that it's a direct cause rather than presented as very passively, like, well, people are going to be fighting wars over water and land soon, and there's nothing we can do other than to like make a fence and have as much weaponry as possible to defend our water supplies, because that makes it more, rather, because I think that is where this is headed, obviously, in reframing water and the climate change crisis we're having currently as like a national emergency or like a foreign policy emergency. It just begets the conclusion that it's one that we're going to have to handle militarily, as opposed to like widespread social and infrastructural investment in green energy. Right. Because, I agree that we're rapidly heading to a point where dwindling resources as a result of like private companies buying them up and polluting them, et cetera, is going to cause less people to have them as, a byproduct of our inefficient mechanisms for distributing resources. But that is not distinct, rather, from the issues that we're facing in terms of like everything else, I guess, is my point. Like, we're fighting all these wars because we don't know how to treat resources like they're supposed to be treated.
Just the flippant kind of comment about the commodification of water, which is like the most essential resource for human life, as if that's just a given. Not just that a war about water is a given, but the fact that the commodification of it. Of course. I mean, I saw The Big Short at the end. I saw that the guy who basically shorted the housing market is now investing in water. I mean, there's this acceptance of predatory capitalism when it comes to the very necessary elements of our existence that she just kind of imbues in her casual statement there in Chicago. And so there could be a proactive effort by the Biden administration to ensure that such conflicts don't happen. But that's not what I'm getting from a statement of recognition, as opposed to a statement of this is something we need to avoid and here's how we're going to do it, as opposed to just, helping the United States build its own city on a hill, as in her view, probably countries that are less developed will be waging these wars, and will ensure that our supply is fine, as if that would never come back to bite us, and the wars we would not involve ourselves, and that we would not be touched in such situations.
Well, we wouldn't involve ourselves beyond selling weapons to, ideally both sides.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. We'd fund the radicals on one side, and then 10 years later we'd be waging a war against them.
This is a business opportunity. The water wars, they are. You can just slap like a Morton Joe face mask to Kamala Harris, and it's just like it's the same kind of energy.
Yeah, it's like.
Well, I mean, that's how America handles this stuff, right? Like, we act like there's this big difference between corporations and the government, but the Nestle and Bill Gates, they're just basically functioning as emissaries from the United States imperialism when they lock this stuff up.
Right. Let's go to the IMs. We're gonna read some IMs before we wrap up. Promiscuous Dope Fiend, Old Matt. Did you watch the Q documentary on HBO? I've seen the first episode so far. I'm catching up now. I think it's really good so far. I think some of it was presented a bit confusingly on the timeline and how but I mean, the whole thing is confusing to begin with for a lot of people. So I think so far so good though. I'll have more to say obviously as I watch more. Married to Mothra says Manchin's family price fixed EpiPens in schools to make his family money. Wasn't that's his daughter, right?
Yeah.
Mexi Marine, over under on Manchin becoming a Republican, just like his home state governor before 2024. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, he could have done it many times throughout the Obama years, and he didn't do it then.
Well, that would make him less powerful. So unless there's a Democratic, maybe if the Democrats like gain seats in 2022, then he would make that switch.
Right.
I mean, then he's just another Republican. Now he's just now he's Joe Manchin. He's the the gum in the works in the Democratic Party. If Democrats pressed him enough, he might do that. I think that is a possibility. But then it's likely that he would just lose all of the face that he currently has, that he needs to keep this grift going.
Also,
and I mean, you have to admit, I think he likes it.
Could Manchin win a Republican primary? That's another question. I mean, he's just the fact that he's a Democrat now, even if it's in name only, would be enough for some far right Trump sycophants to run against him in primary. I mean, based on that voter makeup, he could have possibly win. Talking about his primary challenger, if he was a Republican.
I mean, probably. I think but I think that calculus that we have the goal, or we can sufficiently have the goal to protect individuals in this way from the legitimate threat of Republicans at the expense of what appears to be everyone else, continues to be another hurdle to getting anything done. Where it's like, okay, well, what if Manchin loses his seat? What if we lose West Virginia? It's like, well, we seem to have already lost West Virginia, in every way that kind of counts. So the question of what do we do about this is still left open.
JJ Cool, with all the talk of Manchin, do you think he's just a face to moneyed interests? And if it wasn't Manchin, it would be another senator or parliamentary rules or something else? Yes. To answer your question, yes.
On some issues, I mean, the issues probably vary slightly based on who the person is, but absolutely, somebody rushes to that role.
Right. HR Data Monkey says Brandon Sutton, more like Brandon Squadden. Are you talking about how he's how Brandon is a very big dude? Is that what you're talking about? Brolic?
Guess so.
Nicoloco. Manchin's daughter's under degree and EpiPen price gouging. Right. Yeah, we discussed that. Right. J-Bag says, where the fuck is the British Bake Off love? That's a great show. I forgot about that one. Right. That's a good reality show. I guess no one else here watches that.
No, it's good. I mean, it's just, but everyone watches that. It's hardly the kind of deep cut that people watch, me for.
Yeah, it's like some Top Gear.
I forgot all about it. I
want to also add to the list, because I didn't get to finish my answer. Love After Lockup is probably the best indictment of our current culture for a reality show.
Oh, interesting.
You was a good one. I just remembered another one. Pawn Stars. That was a good one with the father and the son duo. Is that the one, right? Or is that a different one?
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. Yeah. I was just gonna say that that's the real one. Yeah, of course. That's the one. The best show.
That's right. I'm disappointed in myself. I think we should all be disappointed in ourselves for forgetting that one.
It almost transcends the genre. That's how good.
Exactly. John Dapper is in our tour.
He's more of a force of nature. That's not really a reality show. That's just like it's a national treasure.
Yeah, it's like a weather
program.
program.
Save it from Nick Cage.
Mrs. Cloutfire says Dan Crenshaw is unable to perceive the depth of the word fascism. Eric from Iowa says the worst reality TV show I ever watched was called Solitary. Straight up just abusing contestants for money. I'm not familiar with that show, but I'm going to assume it had to do with solitary confinement, which is pretty horrible premise for a show.
The old MTV show Fear was also great, where they had people go into haunted locations with cameras pointing right at their face and walkie-talkies. I love that.
I liked Room Raiders and Next. Those were good MTV reality shows.
I forgot about those ones.
Yeah.
Pimp My Ride. Did we forget about that?
See, Pimp
And
My
Cribs,
Ride.
Cribs was great too.
Yeah,
Made.
Pimp. What,
So-
Brandon?
I was gonna say I was gonna say I like those MTV VH1 era shows like was it Hogan Knows Best with Hollywood Hulk Hogan's family. Like watching those shows
Yes.
back in the like that's a
Yeah.
throwback.
Like I
That
Love
was
New
the
York.
begin-
stuff.
That was the beginning of the end for Hogan, though.
So here's a deep cut for reality show. There was a show in 2005 that premiered on FX that was produced by Ice Cube that I talk about consistently called Black White, where the premise was that Ice Cube race swapped two families and had them live like as the other race in this kind of like Big Brother-esque real world style camered up house. And it's largely impossible to find episodes of still nowadays because a lot of gamer moments in that one, but it's definitely worth a watch if you can find. It's a like sort of a classic relic of like 2000s era like woke social media experiment type shows, until I think the white mom called a group of slam poets animals at the sixth episode, and that's the last episode. So it ends the way it began.
All right. I've not heard of that one. I guess I have to. You've piqued my interest, I guess. Robo Gorka says Steven Crowder did a cool experiment recently. Did you guys check that out? He's a comedian and a scientist. Yeah. Did you guys see this? I believe he did it yesterday. Did you guys?
Yeah, Crowder's trying to get kicked off YouTube, so he did like Chauvin knee experiment where he had his producer knee on his neck.
It's like when Sean Hannity waterboarded himself.
No, that was Hitchens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone else did that too. I think like Mancow did that.
If Hannity did it, that'd be hilarious to watch.
No, I don't think Hannity did it. No, but whoever did do it, I remember their take was that it's not torture. And after they were waterboarded, they admitted that yes, it was torture.
Yeah, it was Hitchens. Hitchens. I mean, and Hitchens actually like legit got waterboarded. That's not what happened with Crowder, so we're not.
Oh no, right? Yeah, no, not at all. We got just a few more minutes. Beat the Reaper says, why would Jesus go to the beach? He can't sink in the water enough to wade, let alone swim. I don't know. I'm sure Jesus went to the beach. Captain Communist says Brandon is MR's resident Anakin Skywalker with his harsh opinion of sand.
That's a funny. It's Attack of the Clones and the second one reference.
Yeah,
that was actually my least favorite of the prequels.
Yeah, Attack of the Clones doesn't hold up. It's really boring when you go back to watch. At least Phantom Menace is really, really bad in an entertaining way. And I actually think Revenge of the Sith is a Star Wars movie. I call it a Star Wars movie. It's a good Star Wars movie. I don't know if anyone else agrees with that.
I think we should hurry and before we get too deep into Star Wars.
The last we could go a while with Star Wars. The last item of the day, Cuomo sexual. Eve's call was terrific. Please clip it. There is just so much detailed explanation and experience that deals with explaining trans issues. Will help me shut down those exact tropes said on my local political radio show. Yeah, it was a really great call, and
it'll be clipped.
Perfect. And Thames Darwin says that Mancow is the one who was waterboarded and admitted it was torture. So I was right.
Hitchens might have been like more on the it is torture before he got waterboarded, but there's definitely video of Hitchens doing it for like Slate or something like that.
Right. All right, folks. Tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern time, youtube.com/Matt Binder. I'll be live. Catch me there. Also, just subscribe to the channel in general, youtube.com/Matt Binder. I'm putting up regular clips from the show as well. And I'll be doing more YouTube exclusive clips like that Boogaloo Boy video everyone liked. So again, see you all tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Matt, Brandon, you guys want to plug your upcoming stuff?
I already plugged, but Brandon, go ahead.
Oh, sure. I kind of lost Matt there for a moment when he was speaking, so I'll assume he's asked me to plug my show.
Yep.
listen to the discourse. You can find it on all podcast platforms. We're releasing a new episode tonight or tomorrow. And theoretically, once my streaming software comes, I'll be trying to defeat the rapping chicken in Parappa finally. I can't speak to anything beyond that, but the rapping chicken is going to be mine.
Oh, you just reminded me really quick. We still have a few more minutes, really quick. Last couple days ago, I did a Fall Guys stream with Mike from the Humanist Report. So I am also getting into the online video gaming streaming stuff, really creeping in on Matt Leck's territory here. Sorry, Matt Leck. But yeah.
I'm not getting into it. This is a personal vendetta with me and this rapping chicken. It's just solely for this. It's about honor, not about gaming.
All right. So the rest of the Majority Report crew will see you all tomorrow. All right, everyone. Take care.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in.